So, hey everybody, today I have got Greg Fleece from Wisconsin, a deer farmer that has been farming whitetail deer out there since the 70s with his family. And he's going to explain to us the genetic resistance breeding that he's been involved in and show us the success stories that have been occurring out there on his farm. Also on this Zoom meeting tonight, I've got Minnesota Deer Farmers Association President Scott Fier wearing the gray hoodie there. And then I've got Senator Nathan Wesenberg joining us tonight as well. So I appreciate that. And we were also waiting for Agricultural Commissioner Thom Peterson to join us, but he's having a little trouble getting on, and he may sign on if he can. So Greg, could you give us a little history of your farm and what happened? CWD showed up on your farm and what you've been doing to combat it.
Yeah, we started raising deer in 1977. Pretty much been a closed herd for the last 25 years or so. Back in 2013, on one of our hunting properties, CWD arrived. They think it may have been on the soil. We had just purchased that property a handful of years back, moved some deer in there, and then they tested positive for the first time in 2013. So we, in 2017, we were introduced to Nicholas Haley from Midwestern University. He's one of the leading CWD researchers. He had been working with looking at different resistant alleles for CWD, and we took a look at what he was doing, looked at what we had within our herd, and started a full breeding program for that. A primary focus is CWD resistance. Since we started doing that, our CWD has gone down dramatically. It's gone down every year, the percentage of positives. The alleles are working. We've also been introduced to Chris Seabury in the last couple of years, and he's got some pretty good new technology out there too. That a lot of the deer farmers are using, to make their deer even more resistant. So
when you talk about the different alleles, I want to talk about that. But before I do that, when CWD first showed up on your farm, and you had CWD, but it's pretty prevalent in Wisconsin, all over in different areas across the state. Is that correct?
It is, yeah.
Yes, and so there we've got Thom Peterson that just joined us as well. Thom, can you hear us? He's going to get his microphone figured out there. So Greg, when you first had CWD show up on your farm, the state didn't shut you down and come in and kill everything. And could you explain to me what led to that decision?
Yeah, they didn't. I think we were the first person that they, treated that way. And I think they realized that we have CWD, kind of throughout our state. And it was an opportunity to try to manage the disease and see if we can, possibly beat CWD or manage a herd with CWD. So we were grateful that they did that. And I think we're going to learn an awful lot from that decision. And we've already learned an awful lot from that.
All right. So you're not allowed to sell live animals off your farm, but you're allowed to continue hunting. Is that correct?
That's correct. And just so we're clear, like my breeding farm has never had CWD.
Right.
So, but the animals from that breeding farm that have gone into that hunting preserve, that's where the CWD is. Man.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you started, and just so everybody watching, we were just joined by Senator Steve Green, as well as Minnesota Agricultural Commissioner Thom Peterson. So Greg, tell us about the alleles. I hear things about a 95, 96. Could you explain that a little bit to me?
Yeah, so with your alleles, you've got, we'll start with the 96G. It's the most susceptible allele, the most common allele. Most deer in the wild or when I started my resistance breeding are going to be a 96GG. It means they have two copies of the very susceptible 96G allele. You can also have an S at 96, which is offers a pretty good level of protection if you have an S. So if you get to 96SS, you have two copies of the S allele, you're even more resistant. Also at location 95, you could have an H, and that provides a great deal of resistance. On our farm to this date, looks like it's provided the most protection, I would say, of any of the alleles. And the third allele that we've been working with is a 226K. Probably, if I'd rank it, would be the third most resistant allele to CWD, but it does offer some protection for sure.
Okay, so you're saying the H at the marker spot number 95 is the most resistant?
It has been on our farm,
Okay.
and from a lot of the data I've seen, I think there's a pretty good chance it could end up being the most resistant. The 96S is great. The 96H or 95H just has worked a little bit better on our farm to date.
So when we have markers that are a GG at location 96, and if I asked you, would most of the wild deer, do you have any knowledge of what they would be?
I think it varies based on location. Texas wild deer are different than Wisconsin. My guess would be about 70% of the deer would be 96 GG, or the most susceptible deer in the wild.
Okay. And so then you can end up with a GS, is that correct, at 96?
That is correct. Yes, if you would say take a GS buck and breed it to a GG doe, there's a 50% chance you would get a GS, 50% chance you'd get a GG.
And so a GS deer is not as good as an SS deer, is that correct?
That's correct. Each deer has two, alleles. If you can get them to what we refer to as double marker or SS, they're definitely more resistant.
And then you can have a combination of an HS or an HH, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So let me back up a little bit here now. So you've been finding CWD on your farm with the bucks that are hunted, you test all of them. And then over a year ago, I thought you told me you had a pretty high prevalence rate of bucks being harvested off your property. And with the switching over breeding to the right genetic markers, your success rate a year ago, what was your success rate? Do you remember?
Yeah, on the one property, we didn't have a single positive. That particular property, a handful of years back, maybe 5-6 years back, was probably 60% of them were positive. They're getting a fair amount of exposure on that property to the environment and everything else. So, and then we do have another property that, we've been studying as well, where we did have some positives on that one, but every year the rate of infection has definitely gone down.
What is the time span of exposure for bucks in your preserve to each other?
It varies, usually a year to 3 years. A lot of deer are born right on the property, and we're hunting them at 3 or 4 years of age. We do introduce deer, and that's where a lot of our data is coming from, is we're breeding for these resistant animals, introducing them into the property, tracking how long they're on the property, how long their exposure is, and, with the different alleles and how they're performing, by knowing exactly the number of days of exposure and all that.
Okay. So what else can you tell me about the success in your breeding? Is if you have one G in any combination of a marker, you don't like that animal, or do you like it, or what can you tell me about what you're really looking for?
Yeah. So obviously, when you start with the GG animals, you breed to like a double marker, an HH or SS, you're going to get one resistant allele. One resistant allele is definitely a lot better than the GG. And I can give you this example. When we introduce deer onto that positive facilities, a GG animal, they're coming back positive at about a 55 to 60% rate at about a year. My single marker animals, which would be like a KG, a GS, a HG, only one resistant allele. During that same time frame, I think we've had 1 out of 62 positive. So again, that's like 2%. Where the GG animals during that same time frame are 55 to 60% positive. Now, when you get to say 700 to 1,000 days of exposure, we're starting to see that the deer with a single resistant allele are coming back positive, but they're really in the early stages of the positive. Again, now the GG animals are going to be positive at about 300 days. A single marker at 700-800 days is when they're first starting to show up with, potentially getting positive. I mean, they could earlier, but basically we're offering about 2 more years of protection where they're not coming back positive. So now if we can take that single marker animal, turn it into a double marker animal and have a bunch of SS, HH, HS, whatever combination of resistant alleles we can come up with, could we go 4, 5, 6, 7 years of exposure before they would become positive? That's kind of where we're trying to get to those answers.
And you don't know those answers yet because it's too early in the research. Is that correct?
It is. We've had maybe 15 animals out on those properties for a significant amount of time, and not one has tested positive at this point yet. And we're talking about 3 years, 2 to 3 years of exposure. So this it's a process. It takes a while to do, but we're probably in about year 7 of a 10-year program with Dr. Haley.
So Dr. Haley, when he's doing this research, can you explain that to me a little bit? What is he doing with you in cooperation with you?
We're just tracking all the data. Like I come up with the data. He does all the testing for me. He genotypes all my animals. So when we know the animals that we introduce into this facility, we know how long they're there. We track that. We get the test results. We grade the level of infection, so he can look and say, well, this was an early level infection, or this one was further along. He also then takes a look at the animals that are born on the facility after we harvest them. He will give me the genotypes. We, compare that to the test results, positive, negative, lymph node positive, OBEX. And he's recording. I know he's come out with one paper a couple of years ago, and probably going to come out with another paper on the research he's doing the next year or two.
Okay. And when you say you're collecting the genotypes, I just recently ran all my deer, my does and fawns through the chute, and I took a little ear tag punch type thing with a little vial on it, and it punches a skin tab, maybe an 1/8 inch in diameter, right into a little test tube, and then I sent them all in and I get my markers back. And that's what you're talking about, genetic testing each and every animal on your farm.
Correct.
Okay, are you doing fawns at birth then, or do you do it the first?
Yeah, we do fawns at birth. Yeah, and then the ones that are born in the hunting areas, well, then we do those upon harvest, because we just obviously we don't handle those at all till we harvest them.
Okay, and then is it safe to say that in your breeding program you want to eliminate anything with the G? Is that correct?
Yeah, you want to get where all your animals are double marker. So you want to get HH, SS, HS. Those are the 3 I'm striving for. Like I said, the K allele is good, but it's not as good as the H or the S, in my opinion, at this time. So yeah, we're trying to eliminate the G.
Correct. And so Scott Fier, as our president of Minnesota Deer Farmers Association, what questions might you have that I've missed here?
So you put me on the spot, Steve.
I did. You knew it was coming. Well, I got.
Let me think about that quick.
I'll let you think about it. So Greg, I contacted you earlier and I said that I had bred to a buck named Soaring Eagle like 15 years ago, and it was an HG. And I did my first round of testing, and I had an HH yearling buck. And you had told me, because it was so long ago in the pedigree, and that Soaring Eagle buck was on the mother side and the father side like 5 and 6 generations back. You had said something like it was equivalent to flipping a quarter like 8 times and having it land on heads every time for me to end up with an HH from that far back.
It is a coin flip when you take a single marker deer like that, and it's a coin flip whether he passes that H forward or he passes the G forward, and that's awesome. I mean, if you have an HH, there's getting to be more of those. I've got a bunch of them myself, just because I've been breeding for this for a long time, but they're rare. And that's an awesome animal. The great thing, is when you take that HH buck, every single offspring that he will ever produce will have an H at 95, which
Right.
is a pretty significant level of resistance right off the bat.
Right. First time I ever tested my deer, I had like the HH buck, and then I had probably half a dozen HS does that
That's
I put in
awesome.
with the HH buck.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then so there again, HS does all bred to HH. You're getting every one of your deer are going to be double markers with the two most resistant alleles possible.
Right. Yep. Let me back up to another thing you said when you were talking about all your deer in your preserve having exposure. And I just want to clarify that a little bit. That means to the viewing audience, the hunters out there, that these deer are having nose-to-nose contact. They're drinking out of the same ponds or the same waters. They're eating on the same food plots. They're eating out of the same feeders. And deer are highly active in social grooming. They're licking each other all the time. And so your preserve might be 300-400 acres, I'm guessing, whatever you have there.
Right.
Those deer are in contact with each other all the time. And you've got animals living out there for 3 years with the right markers, being harvested 4 years and coming out with no CWD. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say. I think CWDs are, it's frequency dependent. Like you're not going to just go nose to nose initially with one and all of a sudden you got CWD. I mean, it's going to take multiple levels of exposure. The more resistant the animals are, the longer they can go without getting the disease. So a 96 GG animal through pretty heavy exposure maybe picks up the disease within 200 days, where an animal with a K maybe goes double that. If you have an H, maybe even go, triple that length before it would potentially get the disease. If you have, again, you get to double markers, you can withstand a fair amount of exposure to CWD and it may not come down with the disease. Probably longer than the normal life of a whitetail.
Right. Right.
I got a
So,
question.
I had heard somebody talking one time. I read a research article, and they said that CWD really was, and I don't know if this is accurate or not. I'm going to ask you. CWD really was misnamed. It was actually scrapie in sheep, and it was the deer version of scrapie. Have you heard anything on that?
You know what? I've heard that same thing, and I believe that's probably where it started, if I had to guess.
Right. And scrapie in sheep was controlled by doing the exact same thing that you're doing, and nothing different.
No, you're exactly right. They controlled it by finding the resistance and breeding their sheep for resistance. The exact same thing we're doing. We're doing it with the markers, and now with Dr. Seabury adding to that, they did it, I think, with a single marker or two. Yeah.
And also with that too, or when they bred the scrapie out of the sheep, weren't they only using 2 markers or 2 alleles? And now we're using like 50,000?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what it was. I think they identified it, as ARR or something like I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, so our focus, so we're looking at these Ks and Hs and Ss, and that's all on the prion gene, which is, I think, without question, the most important gene when it comes to resistance on the disease. But now Dr. Seabury has now he's looking at 50,000 different spots on the genome and giving us some breeding values that we can work with to make them even more resistant.
So now we're using far superior technology than they did in the sheep.
Right. I mean, I think we can beat this disease with what we're doing. It's the only way. I mean, the deer farmers are on the cusp of something pretty awesome in the fight against CWD. We're like right there. It's going to take me a few more years to prove that what we're doing is working. And I'm also incorporating Dr. Seabury into what we're doing with Dr. Haley. So it might be possible to make an animal that can withstand an enormous amount of exposure to CWD and not come down with the disease.
So when you're talking about enormous amount of exposure, and I appreciate what you're saying there, but to our listening audience, a lot of them are going to be deer farmers, and they're going to be wondering how to steer their breeding program, and they're going to be looking at HS and HH. But if you're a hunter and you're not raising deer, and now you're tuning into this Zoom, if you're a hunter, and let's say you live over by Grand Rapids, Minnesota, and CWD, it just pops up in the wild. and it was a random deer, and someone decided to test it, and they haven't had CWD before. I mean, we can only speculate, but do you have any ideas on how in the world it just pops up somewhere?
I don't. There's talk that, hunters moving carcasses around can create some issues, or, if it's brought up in plants, if you buy your hay from somewhere and bring in hay from the CWD endemic zone of, let's say, Wisconsin or out west or something like that. I mean, it can be transmitted or transported that way. Deer, I mean, I think they've collared deer and they've went a long, long ways. So, Minnesota's not that far from Wisconsin, right? And we've got CWD in Wisconsin, so it can cross the border just like anything. So,
yeah. I had heard a number in Wisconsin earlier, and I'm going off the top of my head, but like it was like they had tested, I don't know if it was 18,000 deer, and that represented like 20%. I don't know what the numbers were, but when I did the math at the time, it was like, had they have tested all the deer harvested over that multi-year span, it would have equaled like 100,000 deer with CWD in Wisconsin. Do you have any numbers on that?
I don't. I did see something the other day too that said there was, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 positives, but they had only tested like 1% of the animals.
Sure.
Which again, I think there's CWD probably all over the state of Wisconsin. I really do believe that. I mean, it's probably some more in Minnesota that you guys don't know about as well, in the wild. And I think they test at such a small number. Now, if you test the 4 counties down by Madison, I mean, there's CWD everywhere there. And I mean, those deer they're moving, they're spreading it. It's spreading. So it's probably everywhere.
So those 4 counties that you talked about are Dane, Richland, Iowa, and Sauk counties. And in Wisconsin's fight on CWD, have they done anything positive to slow or stop the spread of CWD in Wisconsin that you know of?
I don't know of anything that's worked so far, but so far I think the only thing I know of that will work is the CWD resistance. We all hear about knocking the deer numbers down to a point there, that they don't spread it, but there really is no end game for that. What do you do? Keep the number so low that you have no deer. Even if you do that, other deer move in, right? They get less pressure. They're going to move in, and so it's having resistant deer is probably the only way that I know. We tried a lot of different things before we started breeding for resistance to try it, and nothing worked. And I don't know that there's anything else that is working out there.
Okay.
I just wanted to throw some numbers out there from Minnesota, the DNR that I compiled here over the last few months on the DNR website. Off the top of my head, the Minnesota deer hunters harvest roughly 180,000 deer per year in our entire state. And of those 180,000 deer, they test about 7.5% of those 180,000 deer, which is a fraction of what they should be testing, in my opinion. But of those 7.5%, less than a third of 1% are coming back positive, which is, if they tested all their deer, like we do, if we have a dead deer, the numbers are pretty staggering on how many positive deer we would have running around in the wild.
But just going from memory on that, I believe that what we heard in committee was over a 20-year period from 2001 to 21, they had tested 120,000 deer and had 194 positive, which is a small amount.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like it was consistent every year until the last year where they tested a bunch. And then I never did get the figures on where they got them from. Since they took them all from southeast Minnesota, where CWD was more prevalent, it wouldn't be an accurate across the state. But that's neither here nor there right now. My question is, because I had mentioned this kind of others too had mentioned that instead of killing all these deer on our deer farms, we should be using them to do just what Greg is doing right now. That would have been the smart thing to do years ago. But how do you transfer that to the wild? I mean, short of taking out some bucks and then releasing high resistant bucks.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think our states have stocked fish, they've stocked probably turkeys, they've stocked a lot of different animals. It may come to a point that seriously needs to be looked at. I think with what the deer farms have done in a few years, it would take Mother Nature hundreds of years to accomplish that. So stocking deer with the proper genetic resistance would make the most sense. Obviously people have to be on board to do that, but you're dead on right that would be, you could go into Mount Horeb, Wisconsin and lower the deer numbers and then restock them with resistant animals. And that would help the program, help a lot.
Sure. I was told that I read an article one time. I thought it was Iowa. Could you guys correct me if I'm wrong? I thought that Iowa at one point, I don't know if it was in the 30s or what, but didn't they stock deer? It was deer farm deer that originated down there, that started it out down there. Have you guys heard on that?
I haven't necessarily heard in Iowa, but I did hear that, yeah, years ago they were stocking deer from deer farms, because I think the numbers around the country were really low, weren't they?
Yeah. Nathan, what did you hear about Pennsylvania the other day? Anything? What did you hear you called out there?
Yeah, so last week I called out to Pennsylvania because I heard that the state of Pennsylvania was working with the private deer farms to do exactly this, is to work with them to have their deer herds be CWD resistant. So I called out there just to verify it. I talked to their DNR and they said that that's in fact what they're doing. They're working with their private deer farms to try to breed the CWD out of their farms. So I have a bill to roll back everything that the DNR did last year in Minnesota and do that here in Minnesota. The science is there. And Greg just talked about it for 20 minutes. So why aren't we doing that rather than trying to kill the deer farmers? Why don't we work with deer farmers and work on making them CWD resistant? So my bill would roll back everything that passed last year, put a 5-year moratorium on doing anything more with deer farms. And the bill also says the DNR has to work with deer farmers to make the deer CWD resistant rather than putting them out of business, work with them towards helping them stay in business.
I appreciate that. When you spoke to Pennsylvania, did they talk about the potential of ever, once they have these deer, what was the end game there? Once they have resistant deer, was it to potentially release down the road if needed, or they didn't get into that?
They didn't get into that. I asked if they were doing that, and they said that yes, they are in fact doing that. So that's about all we talked about. But they said that's what they're doing right now, and it's in fact true. So if the DNR in Pennsylvania is doing that with their deer farmers, the state agencies in every state could be doing that with their deer farmers. The science is there. Let's do it.
Right. And Greg, we talked again about your deer being all in close proximity, meaning they eat out of the same feeders and social grooming. But you talked about deer density. Could you explain that a little bit better? What did you?
Well, so obviously when CWD hit Wisconsin in 2002, the plan was to just go in there and wipe out all the deer, right? Okay. My point is nobody was on board. None of the landowners in southern Wisconsin were on board. No, we all love to hunt. We all love deer. We all love seeing deer on our farms in the wild. Okay. How do you go to a guy and say, hey, you know what? We need to have 3 deer per square mile here. When you go out and hunt and you try to get a kid to hunt and they go out and sit for a season and it's news when they see a deer, I don't think anybody wants that. We need to figure out a solution where we can have deer density numbers at the level where people can go out hunting, have encounters with deer. Kids can see deer. Kids can, enjoy a hunt. I've got a young boy too, and some of his friends go out hunting here in Wisconsin spots, and they go 9 days during the gun season, never see a deer. Well, that kid next year is looking for something else to do. Right. So we need to keep our deer healthy enough and have the density numbers enough where people can still enjoy the hunting.
Right. And as far as CWD being a deer density disease, I've heard it doesn't matter if it's 3 deer per mile or 20 deer per mile. The rate of prevalence hasn't changed up or down depending on the deer population. So the theory of let's go out and really lower our numbers, it's not altering the percentage of positives per capita. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And like I said, I think if you lower them, I mean, we know the deer are going to eventually move back in there, right? So, I mean, it's a short-term solution. If you just say, hey, we're going to just keep wiping them out year after year after year after year, I mean, I don't know if that's not in the best interest of anybody, I don't think.
Right.
Greg,
Okay, well,
do you have any thoughts or an opinion on the infectious dose of CWD, when it comes to saliva or urine, or you mentioned exposure before, but I guess what I'm getting at is we've the state or whoever, we found we're getting really good at finding CWD, but it's, what is the infectious dose or infectious rate? In my opinion, it's kind of like radiation. We've got radiation all around us, but it's not enough radiation to do anything to harm us or kill us, until it gets to a certain level. I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't have the exact answer, but I did hear some things with like urine, like a deer would actually have to consume an unbelievable amount of urine to actually get the disease through that. It's definitely passed from deer to deer, but it's passed with, a fair amount of contact, and I mean, I can't say exactly what it is or how much it is, but it's not just, hey, I ran into a deer with CWD and now I've got it. It's a pretty significant amount of contact, I think, before you're going to come down with the disease. And urine, I don't think is an issue. I think, probably from what I understand, decaying carcasses of CWD positive deer is probably probably worse than anything. But like bans on urine or stuff like that or scents, I think is pointless.
yep. In Wisconsin now, you're operating with CWD. Can people still farm deer over in Wisconsin and get a new license? If a person wanted to start deer farming over, they could start?
Yes, they can.
And are they required to double fence?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, and the thing about the double fencing is it hasn't worked. So we've got CWD hitting some farms in southern Wisconsin that are close to the CWD zone, and they clearly got CWD from the wild. Okay, and they were double fenced, but it didn't stop the CWD from coming into their property from the wild.
So a cat could bring it in and pass feces inside the pen with prions in the feces. You know what I mean? There's many other ways. It come in with a bale of hay, right?
Right. So exactly, the disease is here. It's everywhere. It's probably in a lot more places in Minnesota. We just got to figure out how to manage it. We're not going to stop predators. We're not going to stop the cats. We're not going to stop the crows. We're not going to stop all that. So we have to figure out a way to manage the disease. And I think, the deer farmers are really close to that solution.
Right. What percentage of your farm right now is either an HH or an HS right now? Do you still have any GG does or single Gs left on your farm?
There's still a few single Gs left. I do not have any GG deer in my breeding farm at all. There's probably still a few maybe in our hunting preserve, but we're trying to eliminate them as well. We just don't know. I've got a strategy to do that, but it's pretty complicated, more time than we've got to spend on that. But there's very few of those deer left. Within a couple of years, I will have my entire herd will be double markers, HH, HS, SS primarily, with a little bit of the K allele mixed in.
Okay.
Greg, can you rank them in order of what you feel is the most successful? What are you trying to get to, like ranking in order?
From the alleles, I'm trying to get to HH. And then my next one would be HS, then SS, HK would be next, KS after that. And then for the double markers, the KK would be the least of the double markers. So if you want to rate the alleles from my perspective, I go H number 1, S 2, K 3. So I try to, if I could, I would have half my herd having the, H allele or of the alleles, half of it would be H,
Yeah.
and most of the other ones would be S.
Yep. Good. Are there other farms in America that you know of that are doing the same research you're doing? And are they getting the same results?
You know what? There's a lot of us that are breeding for it. They just maybe don't have the research facility that we have because of having the positives in our preserve. And that being said, there are some in Wisconsin that they are managing, and they're breeding for that and doing very similar to what we're doing. Yeah, so I mean, we're all doing it. I mean, most of the deer farmers are trying to, do the right thing and trying to breed for this. So we're definitely doing that now. I just happen to have the facilities to test it because we had the positives and we're not depopulated. So we're learning so much. In the past, our solutions were as soon as you had one, kill it and wipe it out the problem. Nobody learned a thing from it. Now we're really learning some things and we're actually getting really close to solutions because of what we've been learning.
Okay. And does Dr. Nicholas Haley, does he operate on grant money to help you and research you, or where does the funding come from?
You know what? And I don't know that. I mean, I think he's gotten some grant money, and I guess I've never asked those questions from him. He's done a lot on his own too as well. I know he had a little bit of money, but the budget was tight with what we're working with.
Right.
But I think there's more and more money being available to these guys now for that, and maybe he's applied for that. But like the work on my farm, I've funded pretty much everything myself. I'm hundreds of thousands of dollars into the research, and that's all self-funded.
Right.
So
Yeah.
my profits have gone back into the program, trying to learn about CWD and beat it.
We appreciate all your work. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Any other questions from Nathan or anybody else? Steve?
I would just like to, because I'm not a scientist and you're talking HAHSG, just a short breakdown of the, it sounds like I got kind of a handle it, but I'll probably forget them all by tomorrow. But a short breakdown of what you're talking about when you're talking the breeding, what's best, how and how long it took you, and then go from there. I guess.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, just what
Sure.
they mean.
Yeah. So we're talking about the different alleles on the prion gene. The most
Yeah, I
common.
get that. I know what you're talking about. I gathered that. But if you have a little printout for me so that I can look at it on paper and know.
Oh, yeah. And we can
saying?
Yeah, we can certainly get you that for sure.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we'll just get that info and I'll send it over to you. I'll email it over to you. Steve can give me that info or your email or something. I'll send it to you. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
I'll stop at his office tomorrow and show him what a Punnett square looks like. So
right.
that's what we're doing. So
Right. So my effort to explain what you asked, Steve, is I didn't know what any of my does were. I didn't have a clue. And so I hadn't done any testing. And then all of a sudden I thought, if I'm going to AI, I'm going to breed to what people are telling me is good, which would be an SS. So I started breeding to SS bucks, but my does could have all been GGs. So then I might have ended up with GS or whatever. And then all of a sudden, a couple years go by and I'm still breeding to SS bucks. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I'm finally going to test all my deer. And I was shocked because I did have a lot of S's. I did have about 50% of them with a single G or so. But I was shocked because some H's had survived going all the way back to a buck named Soaring Eagle about 6, 7, 8 generations ago. And I had a double H, which was the extreme rarity. And so again, I didn't really know what all these things were until I was talking to people like Greg and Gary Olson and Scott Fier. They're like, no, this is the way you want to steer your program. Because it was all Greek to me. So now I have a map, and every tagged animal on the farm, I have a value assigned to it. And if it's a GG, we're just going to butcher that doe off. If it's a GS, I could breed it to an SS and have a chance of getting an SS back out of it. It's rare, but I got some H's, HH, HS, double S's. I got lots of them. They're the ones I want to focus on. when it comes time to butcher, I'm getting rid of the GGs. And then when it comes time to breed, I lined up my HH with all my HS does, because then that pundit square that Nathan's talking about, that's going to give me some more double H offspring and some more HS offspring, which is going to be what we want. So, and I'm learning as
I
we go too.
understand that, Steve. I get
Okay.
that part of it. I
Yeah.
wanted on paper so that I could tell to other people, you know,
Sure.
what does the HH really mean, and the breeding, so that I don't get my numbers mixed up.
Sure. Okay. Good. Good. All right. Well,
Steve, can you hear me? It's Commissioner Peterson.
yes.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm in between events today and meetings, and so I'm in a car, but I am in Bluetooth and stuff. So I appreciate the discussion and the opportunity, and always willing to learn and see possibilities or things. And I've heard Greg before. You know, I think it's kind of interesting when you look at like what we did with scrapies and sheep, and I think, you know, always interesting, and that's helpful for me too, to get just some information, more information on it as we look at it. And I appreciate the opportunity to join.
Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Thanks for joining. All right. Is that it, Scott? We've got an auction coming up on Saturday. Where's it at?
Saturday, March 2nd in Austin, Minnesota. We start at noon with a few meetings and a couple speakers. And at 5 o'clock, we start our live auction on DV Auction. So you can join us. Go to dvauction.com. We have a bunch of double markered buck semen on there. We probably have close to 200 straws of double marker semen, HH, SS, HSs. If you're looking for markered semen to build your genetic resistance in your deer, this is the place to be. So please join us.
Okay, where do they find it again?
dvauction.com.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Greg. We appreciate it. Nathan and Steve, Thom,
Yeah,
Everyone.
thank you, guys.